All right, it is 6:02, time to call this special meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That's all right. All right, call the roll, man.
Mr. Clement?
Here.
Mr. Taylor?
Here.
Mr. Duffy?
Here.
Mr. Sherman?
Here.
Mr. Booth?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Okay, we have a first reading. Need someone to introduce it, please. 4822.
I'll introduce it.
Thank you.
All right, ready? Get your cigarettes out. An ordinance of the city of Nelsonville authorizing the issuance of a bond of the issuer in a principal amount not to exceed $3,700,000 for sale to the Ohio Water Pollution Control Loan Fund of the state of Ohio to finance the cost of improvements to the issuer's wastewater system, pledging certain revenues from the issuer's wastewater system on a subordinated basis to secure the payment of the principal of and interest on the bond, and authorizing the execution and delivery of the bond and the trust agreement and other documents and the taking of other actions related to the issuance and sale of the bond and declaring an emergency. Whereas the city of Nelsonville, the issuer, seeks to acquire or construct additions or improvements, the project, to its wastewater system, the system. And whereas the issuer has applied for financial assistance for the project from the Water Pollution Control Loan Fund of the state of Ohio, the WPCLF, and has requested that such financial assistance be repaid to the WPCLF over a period of 45 years. And whereas in order for the WCPLF to provide financial assistance for the project to the issuer and to allow that assistance to be repaid over a period in excess of 30 years, the obligation of the issuer to repay that assistance must take the form of a bond of the issuer to be purchased by the WPCLF, acting by and through the Ohio Water Development Authority, and the Director of Environmental Protection as the Director of the Environmental Protection Agency of the state of Ohio, and together with the OWDA. Whereas the state requires the issuer to adopt legislation that, one, improves the application for financial assistance from WPCLF, two, authorizes the issuance of sale of a bond to the state, and three, authorizes the execution and delivery of the bond and the related trust agreement and other documents and the taking of other actions related to the issuance and sale of the bond. Whereas the issuer is authorized under the Nelsonville City Charter, Section 4.09, to adopt this ordinance and to issue debt obligations of the character of the bond hereby authorized for the purpose of financing improvements to the system. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Nelsonville, Athens County, Ohio as follows. This legislative authority has determined that it is in the best interest of the issuer to issue, and that the issuer shall issue a wastewater system subordinated revenue bond series 1 in the principal amount not to exceed $3,700,000 for sale to the WPCLF, acting by and through the state to finance the cost of improvements to the system. The bond shall be issued substantially in the form thereof placed on file with the clerk of this legislative authority, including the trust agreement to be dated as of the same date as the bond, which is attached to the bond as Exhibit A and is incorporated therein in its entirety among the issuer, the OWDA, and the director. The principal amount of the bond shall be payable on the dates and in the amount specified in the agreement, shall not be subject to redemption prior to maturity, and shall bear interest on the outstanding principal amount payable at the rate or rates and on the date specified in the agreement, and constituting a portion of the payments referred to in the agreement as the semi-annual payments until the principal amount is paid or provided for. The bond is issued, payable, and secured on the terms and subject to the conditions set forth in the agreement, including without limitation, the issuer's covenant in the agreement that it will fix and revise the rates and charges for the products, services, and facilities of the system, and collect and account for income and revenue therefrom to comply with the agreement's requirements. The mayor, city manager, and the city auditor are authorized to execute and deliver the bond and the trust agreement in the name and on behalf of the issuer substantially in the respective forms thereof placed on file with the clerk of this legislative authority, but with such changes as the authorized officials determine to be in the best interest of the issuer and not inconsistent with this legislation, which determination shall be conclusively evidenced by the execution of the bond and the trust agreement by the authorized officials. The bond shall be a special obligation of the issuer. The bond is payable as to principal and interest solely from the revenues defined in the agreement as the pledged revenues and is secured by the pledge of the pledged revenues under the agreement on the subordinated basis set forth herein, provided, however, that any pledge or assignment of or in lieu on any fund, account, receivables, revenues, money, or other intangible property not in the custody of the state shall be valid and enforceable only to the extent permitted by law. The issuer covenants that it will promptly pay from such sources the principal of and interest on the bond issued under the trust agreement on the dates and in the manner provided in the bond and in the agreement according to the true intent and meaning thereof. Nothing in this legislation, the bond or the agreement, shall constitute a general obligation, debt, or tax-supported bonded indebtedness of the issuer. The general resources of the issuer shall not be required to be used, and neither the general credit or taxing power or full faith and credit of the issuer are or shall be pledged for the performance of any duty under the bond or the agreement. Nothing in the bond or agreement gives the holder of the bond and the holder shall not have the rights to have excise or taxes levied by this authority. I keep losing my place. For the payment of the principal of or interest on the bond or any other payment obligation of the issuer under the bond or the agreement, but the bond is payable solely from the pledged revenues as provided in the bond and the agreement, and the bond shall contain the statement to that effect, provided, however, that nothing shall be deemed to prohibit the issuer of its own volition from using, to the extent it is lawfully authorized to do so, any other resources or revenues for the fulfillment of any of the terms, conditions, or obligations of the bond or the agreement. The bond shall be sold to the state for the amount defined in the agreement as the bond purchase price, i.e. the aggregate amount paid by the state to the issuer for the purchase of the bond through one or more distributions from the WPCLF for eligible project costs pursuant to the agreement, each of which disbursements shall constitute the payment of purchase price at par or the equivalent amount of the principal of the bond. It is hereby determined by this legislative authority that the terms of the bond, the procedures for their sale, and the price to be paid for them, all as established in accordance with this legislation and the agreement, are and will be in the best interest of the issuer and in compliance with all legal requirements. The authorized official, city attorney, and the clerk are authorized to make the necessary arrangements on behalf of the issuer to establish the date, location, procedure, and conditions for the delivery of the bond to the state, and to take all actions necessary to effect due signing, certification and delivery of the bond under the terms of this legislation and the agreement. The issuer by issuance of the bond covenants and agrees that the state as holder of the bond to perform its covenants and agreements set forth in this legislation and in the bond and the agreement. This legislative authority finds and determines that all formal actions of this legislative authority and any of its committees concerning and relating to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this legislative authority or committee, and that all deliberations of this legislative authority and of any committee that resulted in those formal actions were in meetings open to the public, all in compliance with the law. This ordinance is being passed as an emergency measure pursuant to Ohio Revised Code 731.30, Article 4, Sections 4.09 through 4.11 as an emergency in the operation of the city government and is necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, health, safety, morals, or welfare of the city, and this ordinance shall be in full force and effect upon its adoption. Duly enacted by council on first reading under the suspension of the rules the first day of June 2022.
Okay.
Everybody hydrate.
Yeah, take a breath.
Wow.
Yeah. All right, is there any council discussion on this matter? All right.
Motion to suspend.
Second.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
Mr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Sherman?
Yes.
Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Clement?
Yes.
Motion to adopt.
Second.
Mr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Clement?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Mr. Sherman.
Mr. Sherman?
Yeah.
Mr. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Booth?
Yes.
Mr. Clement?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor? Mr. Duffy?
Yes.